Disruptive Technologists welcomes attendees to our fun and absorbing discussion on tech disrupts the unbanked and underbanked. My name is Sep DeMeglio, and I'm the Disruptive Technologists MC and Microsoft's User Experience and Accessibility Engineer. This is our 1-hour casual discussion, which will be recorded and posted on the Disruptive Technologists YouTube channel, followed up next week by an attendee Q&A. Today, we're also giving away 3 free 2-day passes to Upflex, their fabulous global office spaces, on-demand workspaces that set your teams free, and 3 beautiful futuristic books by Rebecca Costa, including On the Verge. To enter this lottery, just email your name and email address to info@disruptivetechnologists.com or to organizer@Disruptive Technologists in NYC meetups. Page. Very quickly, we would like to thank our friends and supporters who have been with Disruptive Tech for the last several years. Although we aren't together in person, we want to show them our thanks and gratitude. So first off, thanks to Microsoft Reactors, your neighborhood campuses where developers and startup communities meet, learn, and connect. Thanks to Ramona Wright for supporting our podcast program. Thanks to Esther Dyson for supporting our newsletter program, to Scott Moss for helping us upgrade our website, and thanks to ZeoTag, our interactive video services that tag all of the Disruptive Technologists videos. And finally, thanks to the Disruptive Technologists Chairman, David Soren. Looking forward to being able to meet again in person whenever safely possible. And now I'm going to hand things off to our moderator, Oliver Christie, who's an amazing futurist and artificial intelligence architect. Over to you, Oliver.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, and welcome everyone to another Disruptive Technologists. So today we're going to be talking about the unbanked and the underbanked. So to give some numbers, in New York City alone, there are 360,000 people who are currently unbanked, so 11% of the population, and 700,000 are underbanked, or 22%. So what does this mean? Well, we've got some fantastic panelists today to explain what that means in context, the technology that could help to solve this, and what this means for the city going forward. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our panelists for this discussion. Esther Dyson is the executive founder of Wellville and a very much acclaimed angel investor. Mark Mattingly Scott is the IBM Quantum Ambassador and Principal there. Amy Scott is an industrial digital strategist at Microsoft. Frank, I'm hoping, has joined. So if Frank can make it, Frank DeVille is the data and digital tech architect and evangelist, also at Microsoft. And then last and certainly not least, Catherine Garcia is running for New York City mayor in this year, and she's the former NYC Sanitation Department Commissioner. So thank you all panelists for being here. I thought let's go to Esther first, and let's talk about the facts. What does this mean? What are we looking at in 2021?
Okay, I just want to point out 2 facts. I think it's Amy Young, not Amy Scott, and Catherine Garcia. Yes. That's all right. Catherine Garcia is here, but she's in the audience, and we're going to try and promote her, not quite to mayor yet, but at least to a panelist.
Thank you, Esther.
The problem of the unbanked is that when you don't have these affordances, it ends up costing you money because you have to borrow money, you can't pay for things. And so it's not simply an inconvenience, but it sort of accentuates the shortage of money you might have by just making all the rest of your life inconvenient. And something that people who don't have a lot of money also don't have a lot of is often time. And, I'm not a statistics person, but I am someone who watches this stuff carefully, and it's there's a shortage of money, but there's another thing, which is income volatility. If your money, the amount of money you have goes up and down and you don't know how much it is, You don't know if you're going to pay an overdraft. You don't know if you can afford to buy something now that's on sale and save money versus next week. So the kind of the shortages of time and of money and of convenience accentuate one another, and it makes your problems much worse than they might be if you don't have this technology that I think most of us on this panel here take for granted.
Fantastic, thank you. Amy, how much do you think this is a matter of education? How much of it is access?
I think the two are inextricable. In sort of the pre-emailing between the panelists in preparation for this, I believe it was Esther who highlighted that solving the unbanked or underbanked problem for an individual to solve their unbanked or underbanked problem requires forethought, planning. And, when you're, like, let's just broadly stereotype here, and I apologize for that, but, folks who are, to Esther's point, struggle with variable income, low income, expenses that they're not prepared for, the lack of time is equally a lack of mental preparedness. So when you're in crisis or under threat, none of us does our best thinking, right? And so your focus is on the immediate, satisfying the immediate need, not, well, man, this is a really, I know I'm paying too much for this, in terms of a lending fee, for example. I know that this method is insecure, or, any number of other things, but I can't deal with all that crap now. I have to, I need the cash because I have to, eat, right? So I think a huge part of this comes down to behavioral science, and I imagine a number of the panelists have at least a working knowledge of that. So we should riff on that a bunch more. But I think that really is the crux of this, that it's equally about access. And I can't remember the other thing you said, but you can't separate them. No, education and access. You can educate people all you want. I mean, even people who are banked. So my expertise actually is around financial wellness more than the unbanked problem in particular. And no amount of financial literacy education solves the financial literacy problem. You have to. I could riff on that later, but it's absolutely both.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Mark, we'll get to the hardcore technology in a bit, but I mean, is this something that can be solved with technology, or is it a social issue more than anything else?
I think both have their role to play. If you look at the numbers of unbanked worldwide, it's in absolute terms, it's dropped over the last 10 years from around 2 billion to about 1.7 billion. A significant difference between men and women, and a significant difference based on GDP, per capita GDP. And we know there are a variety of reasons why people are unbanked. What it basically comes down to is, yes, education is very important. On the technology side, I see it as a push and a pull. A push to take, let's call them best practices, particularly in some African nations and some Asian nations, where basically you transfer the traditional or some of the traditional banking infrastructure into a completely new, you skip a generation and everything becomes mobile. That's a technology pull. The other thing is the push aspect, which is to say, to really begin to move proactively away from bricks and mortar banking establishments. Both of those I think are encapsulated in the idea of new banking offerings. If you look at if you look at the US and the unbanked in the US, the amount of money that those people who don't have a lot of money have to pay to basically individually action a transaction into the banking system somewhere, because they have to. There's a huge cost involved for people who don't have money are having to pay costs that we as all account holders don't have. There have to be new offerings. There have to be ways to link new offerings to insured and secured transactional instruments. In other words, extending the way the banking system works and the models that the banking system uses into this arena. I think that's key, and technology will be the enabler that makes that happen.
Thank you, Frank. Great, you could join us. What platforms do you think are going to be crucial over the next few years to help the underbanked?
I think mobile payment systems are going to be more and more commonplace. I mean, it went from my daycare, for instance, my daycare provider for my younger son. She used to accept checks, and then one day she's like, "I refuse to accept checks anymore. Pay me through Zelle." And which at first I was like, I don't know. My wife works in cybersecurity, and I work at Microsoft as a data and AI technologist. So I was a little skeptical of using a platform like that. But the day where it really sold me was, I rarely go anywhere with my checkbook, but I never go anywhere without my phone. So I was able to pay her, even though I'd forgotten to pay her for 2 days in a row. So for me, that was a convenience thing, and not because I'm not unbanked, thankfully, but I think that mobile technology has penetrated even the most rural and remote and underserved communities. So there's definitely an opportunity in terms of these technologies and what they can offer those who are not served by conventional technology. Or the non-technology bank, brick and mortar banks.
So you're saying that mobile is really the solution, more so than, say, broadband access? I think
broadband access, don't get me started on that. I live in Montgomery County, Maryland. My wife and I occasionally consider moving back to Virginia, in Loudoun County, Maryland. And if you look at the top 5 most affluent counties, I don't know who's on top, but Montgomery County, Loudoun County are always in the top 5. If I go 1.25 miles west of my current house, no fiber, no cable, nothing broadband. Now, you do have cell phone towers for, as long as you stay within, a couple hundred yards from the road. But I mean, I think that's a tragedy, but it is what it is. I live as far out as you can get in the DC suburbs and still have gigabit service. So, and in a few years ago, that was only 1/4 mile from my house. So, I mean, this is something that we really need to fix that. But, in all but the most remote areas, at least in the United States, you do have, 3G access at least. And, a few years ago, I've had a number of different roles at Microsoft. One of them was with startup evangelism and outreach. And the person there, who the co-founder of the company, she was like, she basically everything that they did through text messaging. This is 6 years ago. But because people can interact with text messaging, even if they don't have, an iPhone or an Android or anything like that. So I think that, SMS is certainly, I think 6 years ago was that. I think baseline, smartphone that can have a browser built into it or even an app, I think is wide enough now where that'll go. I think mobile is going to change things. One startup I kind of advising now is based in India, and they basically want to do Stripe for mobile carts, that sell kind of goods that go through different villages and things like that. And and I was asking him, well, what about landline access or Wi-Fi? He just laughed. He's like, no, it's mobile.
On that
So
exact
Oliver,
note,
I know you have other people to introduce, but I have please come back to me on that point.
absolutely, I will do. Catherine, let's firstly welcome. Thank you for joining us. What are your thoughts? I mean, the city could be much better. New York is still lagging behind. And you're on mute at the moment.
Not only, as you mentioned at the top of the show, that about 11% of New York City residents are unbanked, it's almost 20% in the Bronx. So 1 in 5 people does not have a bank account. And in New York City and in New York State, we have pretty strong laws about predatory lending and predatory banking, and have made it really easy in terms of how much money you have to keep in the bank. It's 1 penny to avoid an overdraft charge, but we still have people without access. And I truly believe that that is because we do not, as government, every time you interact with us, you should be having a conversation about the need for financial education and the need to have a bank account. And making that part of the seamless process. You know, you're coming in to be certified for Medicaid, you're coming in to be certified for food stamps, you're coming in for cash assistance. We should make that connection at that moment to ensure that we are getting the folks who are unbanked. And, you know, as people still like cash, and they still even like getting a weekly paper paycheck. Because, you know, I had a very large force that worked for me and still had to figure out every week how to get paper paychecks.
Are you using cash at the moment in the time of COVID? I mean, when's the last time you were happy using cash?
I use cash today.
But
that's because I went to a parking lot that it was a lot easier to pay in cash than it was to pay with a card or a phone.
Esther,
is there a problem with employers not wanting to? I mean,
No. It costs employers money to cut a check.
Okay.
It would be much cheaper. We would actually save like close to $1 million a year if I could get them to get direct deposit.
Big numbers. Amy, you wanted to come back on a point from earlier.
I did, thank you. You were asking about technologies that are part of the solution here. Digital identity, I think, is a key piece of the puzzle. As you know, and I totally agree with Catherine's point about as the unbanked or underbanked are engaging with public services, that's a critical juncture to get at people. A bit of a personal story. I have I'm Canadian. I have a 22-year-old daughter back in Canada who lives a bit of an alternative lifestyle and has some challenges. And she is unbanked, despite coming from, having lots of opportunities for education, coming from an affluent family. The last person you would think would be unbanked. And what it comes down to is she moves around a lot. So she never meets the requirements, and she's had credit issues. So she closes accounts because she gets into trouble with a bank, and then can't open another one because she can't meet the AML and KYC requirements. And people who live less stable lives, not an uncommon situation, because you need something that proves your address. And if you're transient, that's a problem. You need government issued ID that you may well have lost because you're not in a stable situation. And, yeah, she has a phone, but she still can't open a bank account. So I send her money for her birthday and I have to send it to her sister, who goes and gives it to her in cash. So and Microsoft sorry, wait, go ahead.
I was just going to say one note for the audience. KYC is Know Your Customer. It's a financial term, and it's a way of trying to vaguely figure out who someone is. It doesn't really stop money laundering. The interesting thing, what you're mentioning, is also a massive problem for anyone who's international.
Yes.
So I've been caught out in exactly the same problem. So I suppose the question to the panelists, is this a banking problem more than a technology problem?
It's a social problem.
Yeah, which encompasses both, right? I mean, we can't not have these kinds of requirements to open an account. We need to do our best to combat fraud and money laundering and all those things. I'm not saying those regulations are inappropriate, but the notion of having a digital identity that is embedded in that phone device, the mobile device, that can reduce a bunch of friction from the process, which is a fundamental part of the problem. If you lose your birth certificate, how hard is it to go get another one? It takes weeks, and then you just learn to live your life without the account.
Well,
So
it takes weeks and it takes money. I mean,
That too, yeah.
I recently, I was born in New York City, and I had to get my birth certificate, and sure, I could do it virtually if I wanted to, plop down $125, which I did, because I'm in a position where I can, but $125 is not trivial amount of money.
Yeah, if you go in person to get your birth certificate at 125 Worth Street is $17.50, and they do take money orders.
Yeah, but what if you're an undocumented immigrant? I actually was stateless till I was 13. There's so many problems you have.
Yes,
And
no,
you lose a work day to go get it, right? Like,
my mom wanted to get her birth certificate, and she was born in New York City as well, and she planned this whole, she lives down here now, not that far from me in DC. She planned this whole trip to go see family, stay with family, and then she found out it was closed, because this is about a year ago during the pandemic. So she, so it just there's a lot of logistical things that I think the pandemic has kind of kicked open, kind of rattled the cage a bit, and we see there's a little bit of rough edges. But I mean, you're right. You can go to 125 Worth Street. Been there a couple of times myself when I was younger. But in a pandemic, that's not possible. Or if you move far away for one reason or the other, then that's not trivial either. And
it's true. I mean, my mother actually ended up getting Social Security later than she anticipated, because she had to get her birth certificate from Houston and figuring out how to get it from Houston. Delayed. She's like, oh, I was going to apply, but I need this other piece of paper that I don't have. But in New York City, you do have ID NYC, which doesn't matter if you're documented, and so you can open an account. Not all the major banks will accept it, but many of the credit unions will accept it.
Actually, which of the big banks will accept it?
Not most of the big banks don't accept it, but Carver accepts it, Amalgamated accepts it. So there are banks where you can, that you are able to open an account. But, if you're managing, without it, it seems like, oh, why am I bothering?
So actually, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second. I'll put you on the spot just for a second to ask you. So you're running for New York Mayor. Do you think this is something that the big banks should be forced to do? Do you think a JP Morgan should accept everyone?
Oh, I do. I think that if you want to level the playing field, you need to make sure there's access. And this is being accepted by other banking institutions. But beyond that, if you look at New York City geographically, even bank branches aren't available though, in many of these communities, and have been closing. Both Amalgamated and Chase closed branches in the Bronx during the pandemic. And I know that they are clearly moving away from brick and mortar as we move forward, but that makes that there's even less access. So hopefully that there is a big jump to the phone, which I think will work with younger folks. It's harder for the older generation to make that leap.
So I'm thinking we've got some very smart people on this call. I think we know the setup, we know the structure of what's going wrong, but let's solve it. Mark, what good. I'm gonna throw it to you. I mean, what technologies are you seeing that or what approaches do you think could help solve this? I mean, and actually, what's the place of quantum in this?
Okay, I was afraid you were going to ask that last part of the question. What's the place of quantum? That's a really good question. I have absolutely no idea yet. But I mean, the wider question, as I said before, and as we heard from Frank, mobile is going to play a major role. However, going back to the 1.7 billion worldwide, a significant proportion of those people don't have access to any technology. How are you going to fix that? And I think this comes back to the financial instruments and financial offerings. The sense that you have a digital identity, you have a virtual identity, you have some kind of second virtual person who's equivalent to yourself and has attributes of yourself. There is a proposal, and I live in Germany. I'm British. I'm over here in Europe. There's a proposal on the table to extend the European Charter on Human Rights to include another 7 articles, including, interestingly enough, the right to digital self-determination, which would mean that, at least in the European Union, you could enforce mobile payments for everybody. There is something for Catherine as well. There is in the European Union, you have the right. Every person has the right. You don't have to be a resident. You could fly in tomorrow to Frankfurt from New York and open a euro account in Frankfurt. You have that right. The bank cannot refuse you. You can't go. You can't get any credit on it. You can only pay. It's only a debit account, but you have that right. But that assumes you have some way of proving your identity. We're back to the identity thing again. So I think, Oliver, there's a couple of things to be addressed here. One of which is how do I actually transport transactions? How do I mitigate transactions? And the other one is, how do I link those to a physical person? And I think there are some very, very interesting technologies out there in the area of digital twins, in the area of mobile and virtual payments, transactions, looking at things like blockchain. The final part of your question, what's the role of quantum? Well, one of the things we're pretty sure about quantum computing is that when we get to quantum advantage, and it's still a few years away yet, when we get to quantum advantage, there will be some very interesting application areas in the finance industry, in things like risk analysis, portfolio analysis. There is a strong emphasis on investment banking, because that's where the optimization makes a big difference. But there are also interesting areas around how do I distribute and route lots of transactions? How can I make things available cheaply to a lot of people? There's a link there to telecommunications and how telecommunications companies do routing of mobile calls and that kind of thing. I think it will have an impact. Exactly what that impact is, I can't tell you.
Sure. What about from Microsoft? I know we're doing quite a lot of work in the area. I mean, do we think we're getting closer to universal ID and universal banking? Or is there not really the demand from the establishment at the moment?
There are a number of ecosystems that have been attempted. The problem is, from an enterprise perspective, everybody wants to they want to be the hub of the ecosystem, right? So Canada has a really interesting scheme set up where, Canada has a highly concentrated banking system. So the big 6 banks bank something like 92% of Canadians. And so they tend to band together on issues of common interest that, that are not, they don't see as differentiators. And so digital identity is one of those things. And so they have invested in a tool called verified.me. They've invested in a company called SecureKey, which produces an app called verified.me. And in fact, the Canadian government, the federal government, is part of this consortium. So they got critical mass of all the banks, a couple of the big life insurers, and the two biggest telcos, two of the three only telcos really. And they aligned on creating this system. And then the federal government, you use this app to log into our equivalent of the IRS. And it was brilliant because you only log in, most people only log in to the IRS once a year, right? And so it's a place where you always forget your password because you haven't been there forever. and it has something funny about its conventions. It doesn't fit normal conventions. So the password that you use for other things never works. And so they offered up this app, which allows you to use the credentials you have for your bank to cross-use them to get into the federal tax agency. So it has had tremendous uptake. Now, people aren't using it in day-to-day life yet because organizations haven't enabled this only went live about a year ago. But the industry has to now invest in using it for use cases that are meaningful to people. So opening a new utility account when you move. I mean, it should be like a life event where you have to do a whole bunch of account administration kinds of things. That's where they should plug in, a digital identity type of scheme. Because this really comes back to the point about reducing friction. Human beings do things the easiest way they can get them done. And we're really, really bad at taking a longer term view of, man, I'm doing this same thing 10 times over. If I just invest more effort up front now, it'll be easier for the next year. We just don't work that way, right? So the critical requirement here is really brilliant design thinking and user experience and thoughtfulness about product design and where do people experience a ton of friction to do something where using digital identity would be easier the very first time.
Right.
So that's why I say public services, social services are the other alternative when you needed to engage with the tax authority was they had to mail you a new password. So you were stuck with a 3-4 week wait. So yeah, I'll do the app. Thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, another thing to consider, again, I'm also from Microsoft, but I don't want to, if you build it, they will come maybe, but I could tell you who will definitely come if you build it. Bad actors and cybersecurity. How do we ensure that the identity isn't hijacked or used for some ill purpose? I mean, that's kind of my concern is like, this sounds great. I'd love to be able to, I used to have DirecTV and they would always have these commercials like, if you move, all you have to do is, I don't know, it was like, do something on your remote, and I would love that. I would love to be able to change all my stuff that easy. But then if someone hacks my DirecTV account, I mean, that's a nuisance. But if they hack, if somebody gets a mortgage out in my name or, sells my house out from under me, that is a much bigger problem. So like, how do we build something that's easy to use, to what Amy said, but also secure?
Are we not there already? I mean, we've just had an election where there is almost no fraud whatsoever. I mean, really none.
Except the whole thing was rigged.
Well,
forgive me, but for the cost of a vote is very different from the cost of an identity. I mean, there's a lot more money attached to an ID than just voting. I mean, we may think it is a big deal, but it's different from people can borrow money in your name and then you're screwed with the bill. They could steal your credit card and buy stuff. And a lot of this goes on, and it's why it's so complicated. But it has a disparate impact on poor people because they don't, like 4 weeks, but maybe I'm not going to be living at this same address in 4 weeks, or maybe I don't have an address, or my neighbors regularly steal my mail.
This sounds like more not bad technology, but bad critical thinking around technology. Do we just need smarter, more thoughtful approaches?
No, we need universal basic income or something like that. I mean, it's not just a tech problem. It's a lack of access to the tech. You can have the best tech in the world. If people don't have access to it, it doesn't help them, and they are more disadvantaged. I mean, all this stuff, you need a cell phone to do it, and that's another problem.
Actually, on that note, Catherine, broadband access in New York is not very good. I mean, it's incredibly poor. I'll put it that way to be generous. Do you think we need one cell phone for everyone? Should everyone have access or be given a smartphone who then have access to identity and banking and so on? Do you think that might be the answer?
Yes, no, I think that during the pandemic, what we learned was that broadband and access was not a nice to have. It was fundamentally important whether or not you were going to be able to work or do school, or in New York City, at least get a vaccine appointment. It was a tremendous number of websites you had to get through. And we actually have done a lot in this area during the pandemic because we gave every school child either a Chromebook or an iPad, and gave everyone who was elderly and had been attached to a senior center an iPad to try and make sure we didn't leave folks isolated, and engage them with programming. I think that needs to be expanded.
Two questions. Firstly, were people using it for banking? And secondly, how did people get online?
So all of the devices came with cell enabled, to sort of jump the hurdle of, was their building wired with fiber or not? And did they use it for banking? I don't know. I doubt it. Most people still do not have a bank, so they're not downloading that app. They were using Google School for the most part, is what the big use was. But that is where it's about, you tie back to the education piece and, how does banking work? Why do I need to use this with the access piece? Because there are a lot of things that should make it okay. You only need $25 to open an account. As long as you have a penny in it, you're not going to get charged extra fees. But why am I using this? Why is this better than I went to Duane Reade and sent money via Western Union, or got a Visa card and sent that in the mail to pay, my landlord? Why is this actually easier? And I don't think that's crystal clear to people.
It's not simply a case of all of those other things cost more money, take more time.
But they don't see it that way. There's a lot of fear. They've heard all the stories of their aunt or their grandmother overdrafted, and suddenly it was a $25 fee, and then it was $100 and $800, and suddenly it's an astronomical amount of money that they can't fathom how they would ever get out of. So one is promotion, and two, they don't find that hard. It's just part of their daily routine to do it that way. And they don't find that the concept of setting up a direct deposit account sounds really hard.
So it sounds like we've gone full circle and we're back to education and informing people what could be done. So I'm wondering, there was a time where none of us used PayPal, for instance. Then it came on, it was very well marketed, and we sort of dipped a toe in the water. So I'm wondering if is it a matter of education, of getting people to start? I'm also wondering, as the amount of cash being used in the US has dropped over the pandemic, I mean, it's nowhere close to Europe, but are we getting close to more movement?
So
Maybe I think we need to be more precise about what education looks like, because it ain't a pamphlet,
Well,
right?
and also, I think financial literacy is just not taught
No.
in school.
Yeah, but that doesn't the studies, the academic literature on this is unequivocal that the knowledge that you're trying to impart needs to be integrated into an experience and a context in which you need it. Teaching me something for some point in the future does not work. And so that's why I say integrate these things into, government benefits. So universal basic income, fine, but it goes into a bank account. And when you go into whatever office to apply, part of it is, there's a kiosk or I don't know what, where they help you open the bank account. And so it's not, you connect the learning to the time where you're going to use it. It's almost like, I don't want this to sound patronizing, but it's kind of hand over hand. It's the only way it works.
How much do you think that people's pride, because people are embarrassed to say they're unbanked. I think that's why it's such a shocking problem, is that people don't.
I don't think that that's it. I think they actually don't trust banks.
Well, there's that.
More
Both.
than anything
Both.
else. They don't. The banks don't necessarily have a great reputation in poor communities. And the other thing is, we are actually asking young people to do this right now. To walk into a high school building in New York City, you have to every day complete the COVID app on your phone, which you are presumed to have, and then show your check mark so that you can go into the building. That group of people is going to be much easier to get banked. They're accustomed to using things electronically. They're accustomed to apps. They're accustomed to the fact that you communicate on text, that you're not actually speaking to a person. Then there is a group of people who are older, who are not as comfortable and just as distrusting of banking, and probably have gotten burned a few times before some of this legislation got put into place. And they miss their passbooks. Not only do there are a lot of people who still miss their passbook.
Esther, you invest in some really interesting ideas and companies. Are you seeing this as being a problem to solve that startups are wanting to solve, or is it intractable at the moment?
So the most interesting, relevant company I'm invested in is called The Beans, but it's for people who have a steady income and are banked. I mean, honestly, no, I don't think this problem can be solved by a hot startup with cool tech. I think it can be solved with one, education, and, as Amy said, not here's a pamphlet or here's a course in 4th grade. It's got to be more relevant. There's this wonderful term they use in the business. It's not wizards and it's not training, it's performance support. While you're trying to do something, it tells you how to do it so that you can actually understand the system that you're trying to enter into. But the fundamental problem is, as Catherine says, this stuff isn't relevant to people, and we're not making it relevant. It's like, this stuff is scary. Long ago, I had to go to Scranton, which was this poor community in Pennsylvania that's now famous because of Joe Biden. And I went to Port Authority Terminal. I'm a rich white lady. I could have taken an Uber, but I don't drive. And I wanted to take a bus just to see what it's like. And Port Authority was confusing. You had to buy your ticket in one place, and the ticket wasn't actually for Scranton, it was for some other place. And then you went down to where you were supposed to wait for the bus, and it wasn't really clear because they hadn't posted where the bus was coming. So I get on the bus and I hand my ticket to the driver, and he asks me where I'm going, and I say Scranton. And he says, well, this ticket won't get you there. And then he looked at me again and he said, lady, I'm going to get off the bus at blah, blah, blah place, and there's going to be a new driver, and you just stay on the bus. Don't tell him nothing. And if I'd been some Black dude, I doubt he would have been as accommodating.
Mm.
And this is, life is really confusing. And so, yeah, pay the $20 for the Western Union because you trust it. And the banks, people who've had bad experience with banks, you've heard about overdrafts. And again, you're not really sure, how much money do I have in the bank right now? Can I afford to do this? And so it's simpler to work with cash and, feel that you're in control.
Mark, you're obviously over in Europe. It seems like the legislation has been pushed forward, so banks have to make the change. Also, Germany is using an awful lot less cash now, paper cash, than it used to. I mean, do you think it's one of approach? I mean, do you think what works in Europe could work in the US?
Actually, as Esther was talking about that, I was just having as an internal smile. Germany, of course, everything runs like clockwork. Apart from vaccinating people, we can't manage to get that into order, but that's another question. There have been proposals by various governments to eliminate cash because obviously there are advantages to that. There has been a huge groundswell resistance to eliminating cash in Germany. It's not going to happen. It's political suicide to even talk about it. Like it's almost as bad as enforcing speed limits on the Autobahn. And I think that you'll see that in a lot of countries as well. Cash is still, you could trust it. It's like there's a thing in my hand and it's got a value. I mean, actually, we're all kidding ourselves. It doesn't, but there is, it's a fiat currency. Its value is because of an agreed contract between you and the government. I think the other thing is that looking at the problems in the US and in New York in particular, there are very, very many, but what I call best practices out there in the rest of the world. Things like legislating that every citizen has a right to a bank account. I mean, it's real, it sounds like rocket science. It isn't, it's dead easy. Catherine, I was I was astounded when you said that you gave everybody either an iPad or you gave them some means of communicating digitally because of the pandemic. The other question then becomes, how do I link that to my everyday problems? What are the everyday problems of somebody with very little income? What are their interactions? Where do their interactions cause friction? And you mentioned, Esther, buying a bus ticket. I can tell you, it's no easier in Germany. It's just as confusing. Where are those interactions? The place you can start is all interactions with the government. You can mandate that those are, so Amy, you mentioned, when you go to register to receive some benefits, automatically, if you haven't got a bank account, it's part of that process is here's your bank account, and that's where the money is going to get paid. And if you want to go to an ATM and pull the cash out, fine, but it's there. That's something that's relatively easy to do. The other thing, I've been doing some research for this session this evening, and I discovered there are only 2 countries in the world with 0% unbanked. Both of them in Europe. Both of them, one of them isn't Germany. I think Germany, we have about 4 or 5% unbanked. And that's Denmark and Finland. And those are both countries which pioneered the mobile revolution. And there's obviously a link there, but they're also countries which embrace all technology. Denmark was one of the first countries in the world to fully roll out blanket telemedicine and online, virtualized medicine. Finland as well. So there's definitely a cultural aspect. as well. Trust, culture, education, and taking, picking people up where they are, and not telling them, oh, there's a wonderful, there's a pot of gold, excuse the pun, at the end of the rainbow. So I think that's
so thinking about that, if there's 360,000 who are unbanked in New York, is there any reason why IBM can't get together with Microsoft, can't get together with the city, create 360,000 bank accounts which are ready to go? Is there any reason it couldn't be done?
I think that it might have been Catherine mentioned Western Union. I think it's about trust. It's not about, obviously logistics will play a role in it, but I mean, it's not trust. They don't trust, these communities poor communities don't trust banks. And, let's just say that didn't happen accidentally. Like, I mean, that happened organically, but they trust Western Union. Ironically, they're getting cheated by them probably more than the banks would, but I think that there's a certain sense of control. Western Union can't take money from me if I don't, I know what the charge is. It's whatever X percent, up to a certain point. But I mean, I think maybe, it would be good to start with brands that these communities trust, like Western Union or any.
Well, how about Starbucks? I think we trust Starbucks to give us a coffee.
Not your money.
No.
I'm not sure a luxury brand is.
So pick a brand. Should someone outside of banking produce the next bank?
I mean, Catherine's right, that go to 125 Worth Building. That's where you should be able to get this kind of thing, along with your SNAP and your Medicaid card. And I mean, those are complicated enough, but that's a system where,
Yeah. The one other thing that we're not talking about that is also a friction for people having banks is a real fear of privacy. Of somebody in the cloud knowing what I'm doing, that makes people very anxious. And so why they go to Western Union, even though of course Western Union is tracking their data.
And if you have a phone in your pocket,
you're being I get it. And Google knows all, and it's listening to me. I understand, but there still is this perception that if you're carrying cash, you're not as under the surveillance state than if you're using a card. And I think that is another hurdle. But I do believe, one of the things that happened during the pandemic in the first CARES Act was if your kid was in public school, and New York City has universal free lunch, so it was every public school kid, they gave everyone SNAP benefits automatically. You got $400. If you had a card, it got automatically loaded, whether or not that was food stamps or Medicaid, and they sent a check to every single kid's house. And so then it was figuring out for those kids who got a check, their parents got a check, how to get them the money so that they could actually go buy the food. There are hurdles that I think we need to be thinking about. But I do believe that it is particularly this interaction with government where we need to be forcing the opportunity for banking and the opportunity for education.
I wonder if, I'm not sure this is a good answer, but I wonder if cryptocurrency has a role to play here. It has a perception, to address the lack of trust in the formal banking system, right? If people trust in, technology, but crypto has this, its brand is sort of, it's on the fringes of society. It's the confidentiality, I think people that might be part of some public consciousness. I mean, we've certainly heard that criminals and drug dealers are making good use of it. So I'm not sure if this is not advocating for that, obviously, but I wonder if it's, we're talking about banks versus Western Union. It just galls me to think that Western Union would be allowed to rehabilitate its brand by launching a bank that doesn't, extort people. But I wonder if crypto is a third way.
Esther, what do you think?
I don't actually think so. And there are really two reasons. One is, again, cryptocurrency to me means dudes and SPACs and Silicon Valley and, maybe some drug dealers, but I don't think it's really of interest to the unbanked. And the second is, if you lose your crypto password, you're totally screwed. And, there aren't, maybe 15 years from now, you can buy groceries with crypto, but right now it's really more for financial transactions than for the coffee shop or, paying the babysitter or.
But there could be an opportunity, speaking as a systems engineer, that the back end of any consumer facing service could use crypto to move.
Yeah.
It would be invisible, but it would free you from a lot of banking regulations, maybe.
I'm not sure you want to be freed of banking regulations.
I have to go to a 4 o'clock, but I really thank you for having me. And I really appreciate the opportunity to think big thoughts about how to solve a big problem.
So actually, as we've got 2 minutes left, Catherine, do you want to, actually for the whole panelists, do you want to give your closing thoughts and one piece of technology you might want to push for this? Catherine, I'll let you go first.
Oh, certainly. And thank you. I actually think that bringing minds across different sectors is really helpful. The one person who I think we should have had at the table is somebody who's unbanked. So these are our theories about what will solve the problem. And they could say like, absolutely not. Or I love crypto. Great. Like, we don't know. But these are the types of conversations we need to be having around big problems in this country and in this city, and really straightforward. I believe that that the technology is there, that we can use. It is available today. It is overcoming the hurdles to get people to use the technology. But I do believe it will be mobile before it is, we are at a place where broadband is going to cover everyone.
Fantastic. Frank, last thoughts.
I would say, let's bring back the credit unions. I think credit unions serve the role of providing banking services to a much wider population. My family growing up, we were, big part of the employee credit union where my dad worked. And, I think that was really kind of banking by the community for the community. It's not going to fix everything, but I don't think one solution is going to fix everything. And I think that this is about trust as much as it is more than technology, I think.
Fantastic. Esther, your thoughts?
I would second Frank. They're still there, and I don't know why they're not more widely used, blah, blah, blah. But and I second you also. I think this is much more a social, economic scarcity of time and money problem than it is a tech problem. And so, we should be listening. We should do what good startups do. We should go talk to the customers, as Catherine suggested, and see what they think.
Fantastic. Mark?
Yeah, so Esther, you just stole my words there. I think the key thing is to talk to the unbanked people, understand what their issues are, address those in the context in which they experience them. Obviously, one thing is all interactions with government, but another one, Frank, you mentioned credit unions. Obviously, this is a very American thing. I'm not familiar with it, but that for what I do understand about credit unions, this is a financial product, a particular financial product, which has some strengths in the context of the current community of unbanked. Let's be flexible in the types of financial instruments and financial offerings and financial products. That we need flexibility there, not just in the technology, which will support that, hopefully.
And Amy, last words.
Well, fascinating conversation. I think I'm going to echo everyone else's thoughts that it's not a technology problem. There's plenty of technology. I would, and unquestionably, we need to be, really understanding the user experience. of why people do what they do in this space, why it feels right to them, or at least better than the alternative. But ultimately, I think that this is a policy opportunity, in terms of weaving these types of solutions into social engagement with government services. I thought Catherine's point about youth today, or New York youth today, having to fill in their COVID questionnaires as they enter the building, that's a great metaphor for the kind of muscle that needs to be built here. And I think we could do that in so many ways with thoughtful policy and policy engagement along with product design, because that implies an empathy with the user. So it's not Silicon Valley slick. I totally agree with Esther's point there, but I think there is a role for elegant, empathetic product design here.
Elegant product design, fantastic. Well, thank you all to the panelists. You were fantastic. I loved it. I love the conversation, and hopefully we're getting closer to solving the unbanked problem. Do stick around, send questions, because in a week's time, Bruce Epstein will be hosting a fireside chat as a follow-up to this conversation. So send questions, send thoughts, and we'll be answering them. Esther,
and send any unbanked friends you have to join the questioning next week.
Fantastic idea. Yes, absolutely. More the merrier. So thank you all so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.